And today we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to tell you the reason why. I have lived in Southern California for decades, and I have property in Southern California, commercial property, residential property that I collect rent on each month. And I hear people, like, I'm watching the news and they turn around and they say, oh, housing prices is unreasonable in California. It's going through the roof. And it's based on greed, the greedy landlords. And the builders, they're only building certain type of houses that take up a lot of space, and that's just not fair to the average person. And you know something? This whole pricing thing is difficult for an average person. I mean, if you're in Southern California to buying a decent house in a decent location, you're talking $600 to $1 million. I mean, that's outrageous amount of money just to buy some property. But there's numerous reasons why that's the case, and we're going to discuss them. And then at the conclusion, you'll hear my recommendation. And even if you're not in Southern California, if you hear what I'm saying, you might want to have some discussions with your local governments. But to start out with, first of all, California, even though it's a big state, there's only certain places that people want to live. So they want to live close to the ocean, and the reason why is when you're close to the ocean, the temperatures are moderate. In the summer, they don't go really super hot, they go warm, don't get me wrong. They do go warm, but they're not like other parts of the country or like the desert. And in the winter, it doesn't really, I don't think I've ever seen in Southern California close to the ocean, seeing it below 32 degrees. Now, sometimes it can get down to 30, but rarely. So it's moderate temperatures. It's a great climate. But if you go, if you go 20 miles west of the shore, the beach, what happens is it gets extremely hot in the summer, and it gets just cold there as it does most places of the United States. So most people want to live close to the ocean. Well, it's nice. I mean, come on, you live close to the ocean, you can see the ocean each day. It's beautiful, Pacific Ocean, things like that, the beach, things like that. But the biggest thing is the climate is wonderful when it's close to the ocean. So you have limited land, even though you got this big state that is huge. Most people don't want to live in the desert. So my discussion is pretty much going to be kept to those areas where people really want to live. So there's limited land where people really want to live, and what happens there is the price of land really goes up and is really quite high. Because of that. I remember, you can get a decent house for $200,000 30 years ago. Well, that decent house that you paid $200,000 for is now worth over $1 million. I did buy that property at that price, and now it's well worth over $1 million. Prices go up and up and up because there's limited space. People can't afford to live here. And you know something? You may not be able to afford to live here. So maybe California isn't for you if you can't afford it. There are some beautiful places throughout the country where you can live that you don't have to put up with some of the nonsense that's in California. Of course, the weather is fantastic here. So let's talk about some of the other issues, okay? I remember my wife and I decades ago decided we want to build a house, and we thought about it, we started planning it, we started how much it was going to cost. I started gathering figures. Now I was on the local school board, and the local school board is a state agency in California. It may be different in other states, but in California it's a state agency. So they have the right to override the city, they have the right to override the county, everything else. They have a lot of authority, and they're above all those other agencies. So we decided there was some wonderful piece of property, and the owner wanted to sell it, so we didn't have to condemn the property. We could just go out and buy that property for our next high school, and it had nice acreage around it, everything else, and so we decided to start the process. Now, when you're in California and you're buying land to build on, you better have people who know what they're doing when it comes to regulatory agencies. So the first thing that happened was We had to tell them, we're interested in buying the land. The owner was happy and everything else, but we had to contact the Coastal Commission. So the Coastal Commission got involved, and then since it was close to a major highway, we had Caltrans getting involved because they want to know where the exits and the entrances were going to be, stuff like that. Whether we could even have an entrance, which they decided later that we couldn't off the major highway. We had to go down a small street to get to the property. But environmental groups got involved, all sorts of agencies, even the Army Corps of Engineers got involved. And so the Army Corps of Engineers said that there was a creek that went through the property. Now, we proved that this creek, I don't want to get caught in all the details, I just want to prove something to you though. At this creek, was not really a creek. It was the owner of the property decades before decided to put a V in the property for when it rained, the water could go into that V, out to a proper place, into a river that was close by, and it was that way for decades. But it was not a naturally occurring. In fact, the only time there was water there was when it rained. But we were told that the Army Corps of Engineers had all sorts of regulations that we had to keep this indentation in the land, and we had to protect it from humans. The environmental people got involved and said there's endangered species on the land. I think it was a little frog, and that we had to prove that there's no endangered species in this land. And so we spent millions of dollars, your taxpayer money if you're in Southern California, on looking for a frog for over a year, which never appeared. So it was taking years and years to satisfy all the regulatory requirements. And on top of that, they said, this is like 10 acres, you're going to have to find 10 acres somewhere else unused in the area that has coastal sage, and you're going to put a fence up around it, and you're going to have to pay an organization to maintain it forever. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But we had to contract with another organization to do that because that was called mitigation. We couldn't take away all the beautiful sagebrush or whatever it is, coastal sage. Anyway, to make a long story short, I was convinced after all this craziness, and no way I'm ever going to buy or build a building in California, especially in Southern California, along the coast somewhere. So since I have a business here, I needed a warehouse. So my wife and I decided to buy a warehouse, and we purchased this warehouse, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was a beautiful area. It was close to the freeways, things like that. They had to handle all this stupid stuff from Coastal Commission and all these other agencies. So my wife and I, we bought this building, but it only had one office in it. Now, this is a 6,000 square foot warehouse. And so what I decided was that we would build additional offices in there for the salespeople, for the managers, for the employees. And so we got an architect who put the design there. I probably shouldn't have to done that, but we had to do everything like that for the city. And not only that, we went to the city and we asked for a permit, and that process took months to do. But a couple days after we pulled the permit, only a week or two after we moved in, I get a city official shows up and says, "Where's your business license?" I said, "Ma'am, it's in the back in one of those boxes. As soon as we unpack those boxes, I will make sure the public can see it when they come in here." And she said, "No, that's not good enough. See, your old business license has the address of your old location." And I said, "Well, do you have a form? We'll just fill it out right now and I'll sign it. We'll change the address." And she said, "No, you can't do that." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "Because you don't have an occupancy." And I said, "Yeah, I do. Here it is. A certificate of occupancy. It's a safe building. Fire department has come by. Engineers have looked at it. All that costs money, but it's a safe building. So here it is." And she said, "No, you pulled permits. Because you pulled permits, all that is null and void." And I said, "Well, I need a business license, right, to have business here in Oceanside, California?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "So what does all that matter?" She goes, "Well, I'll tell you, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be back in 3 days, and if there's still, if some of your employees are here or anybody's here, you're going to get a $500 a day fine. And I said, for what? And she said, because you don't have a business license. I said, you're preventing me from getting a business license. And she said, sir, this isn't my problem. I said, well, what do you expect me to do? She goes, just go out and rent another warehouse until you finish these drywall. It was only drywall, just a couple drywalls. And I said, ma'am, I can't afford it. And she goes, that's not my problem. She goes, here's my report. You got it. She handed it to me. 3 days and get out of here. So I called people at the city. I called everyone. I couldn't get anyone excited. So what I did was, this is interesting, is I decided to figure out what it would cost to put a big banner across my warehouse. Huge banner. And it was going to say, businessman, if you're thinking of moving to Oceanside, see me first. Don't come here. See me first. And so I called up the city manager and I said, hey, city manager, I don't know you, you don't know me, but I can't get a business license because of some of the requirements that you people have put on me because I'm trying to do improvements and I went through the rules, even though everyone told me don't pull permits, just do the work. Close the door, lock the door, put blinds down on the windows so no one can look in, and build those 2 offices that are made out of drywall. And so no, I said, no, let's do it legally. Let's do it right. Let's do it the way it's supposed to be done. And my big mistake. But, you always want to do things illegally, so I don't want to tell you to do something illegally. But to make a long story short, I called that city manager and I told him. And I said, I'm going to put that sign up. And one of the comments was, do you have a permit for that sign? I said, no, but I'm going to put it up anyway. And he said, oh, okay. I said, you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to call the local paper, the business section, the reporters from the business section, and I'm going to ask them to come out and take a picture of me in front of that sign so I can explain how you're putting me out of business in Oceanside, California. An hour later, the fireman showed up and said, how many exits do you have in this building? I have 3. How many fire extinguishers do you have? I said 3. You have occupancy. So I got occupancy and I got my business license. Yes, and I was in business in a building I could just barely afford a mortgage on. But to make a long story short, you want to know why it's prices in California, building and everything else? I tell you, the builders are going to tell you, at least the smaller, the big builders I'm sure have certain exceptions that they're allowed. But I'm telling you, the reason why is because there's nonsense in government. Government is the one that slowed me down. It took 5 months, by the way, for me to build those walls. It wasn't that the contractor wasn't willing to build them in 1 week. It was the city had to look at them each month, had to look at the plans, come up with changes to the stupid plans of just a couple offices made out of drywall and a drop ceiling. I swore I'd never buy another commercial building in Oceanside, California because of this. So to make a long story short, you want to know why houses are so expensive? Limited space and the crazy, sometimes a permit sections of cities and counties. And of course, we're going to talk about taxes and regulations. You want to rent out a house, there's a lot of problems in California. Now, the opposite. I go to Texas on a regular basis because I'm interested in real estate in Texas. And I do own real estate in Texas. So I remember one time, this is a rural area of Texas, and I was thinking of buying some land and building on the land. And so after going through these 2 incidences with the school board, see how hard they had to do their, just to build something, even though they're a state agency, and the problems I had with my warehouse, I decided I'm going to have to fully investigate this before I decide to put down money for this acreage. And so I said to the guy, I said, hey, really interested in building on here. Who do I talk to about permits? And he looked at me and said, permits? Why would you need permits? And that's why the housing in Texas is so reasonable. Now, do they have permits? Yes. In some areas they do, and they do have inspections. But they're reasonable because the people in charge of the permits where I had to deal with in Texas understood the nature of business, understood that, and didn't just, here's the rules and you're out of business attitude that you get in California. And that was the attitude. They gave two hoots whether I went out of business or not. They didn't care if I moved to Oceanside or just pulled up all the stakes and moved somewhere else like Texas. Thank you for watching. Very much appreciate it. You have a wonderful day.